morning and welcome to the Sunday service. This morning we are going to meditate few minutes. After the meditation, we have Dharma talk. Ron Kusala is going to give Dharma talk. After that, question and answer. Last item is chanting. Now Vinita is going to lead the loving kindness meditation.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to practice loving kindness meditation. We need to practice daily loving kindness meditation these days because all the people are suffering from the COVID-19. That's why let's practice the loving kindness meditation. May I be well and happy, peaceful, and free from suffering. May no harm come to me. May no difficult come to me. May no problems come to me. May I always find fulfillment. May my teachers, Dhamma teachers, be well, happy, and peaceful. May my parents, brothers, sisters, friends, and relatives be well, happy, and peaceful. May all beings in this universe be well, happy, and peaceful. Please practice like this few minutes after the ring the bell. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Before the start Dhamma talk, I like to inform something regarding about the Ulambana service, which is offering the merit for the departure relatives. We are going to do this year, this month, end of the month, which is the 29th of August. We are going to do it in IBMC backyard. So please come and join with us. We are offering dana for the monks, maybe 10 monks, maybe 8 monks, I'm not sure right now. And food for lunch for everybody. Please come and join. It's going to be around 11 o'clock, Sunday, 29th of the August. Please come and join that day. We are doing the backyard behind the temple. So that's the one announcement. So yeah, thanks for the Selvin. Selvin was bringing some food yesterday for the monks. Again, thank you very much. And right now, Reverend Kusala can start his Dhamma talk. Kusala is, we cannot hear the sound.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
The sound now?
Yes.
Okay. Unplugged device with audio jack. Okay. Good. And okay, I was struggling to find out what to talk about, and thankfully I got an email from somebody on my Facebook page. And they said, I've heard about no self, and I don't understand it. What does Buddhism mean about no self? So let me talk a little bit about that today. If anybody else is confused about it or thinks they exist in a certain way. So back in the 1980s, I think it was the early 80s, I found a book by Ken Wilber called Up from Eden. And Up from Eden was talking about the evolution of human consciousness and how we went from sort of a half asleep creature, human, animal, to a more awake creature and becoming more human. And that was because of the sense of self. So I found it fascinating that we started without the sense of self as a human, and then we finally acquired it. Never could figure out when or why, but somehow that was a blessing and a gift and a curse all at the same time. So back in the 80s, it was very popular to call it no self, that they would, sometimes the authors would say there is no self. And I struggled with that because I realized that I had one. It was a rather large one. It was rather loud at times. And how could they tell me that that didn't exist? Because that was how I made a living. And that was how I interacted with other human beings. And that's how I was recognized as being similar to the people I had been before, a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. So there seemed to be some consistency between this thing called myself and a self. And so again, I struggled. And then later on, I started reading books about the self, And for some reason, the authors in the books changed it from no self to not self. And I'm going, okay, now I can work with not self. I can say and think and feel that I have a self, but it really doesn't define me in an ultimate way. It's a relative understanding, a relative feeling of being in community with other human beings who also have the illusion of self as well. And that's how we communicate and understand each other, by having that definition of who we are. So how do we get that? How do we define ourselves? What do we do? What has happened to us? Why is this thing so strong and so defensible that if somebody intimidates us or curses us or tries to make us feel bad, we feel that we have to defend ourselves, and arguments happen and anger happens and all this stuff that happens when you have something to defend. So I look back on my life and I'm thinking to myself, you know, it's all my parents' fault, because they're the ones that's kept talking to me. You know, you're going to be somebody one day, but right now you're nobody, and we're going to send you to school to make you into somebody. So I'm going to grade school, I'm going to kindergarten, I'm going to high school, and I'm doing all the things that are necessary for me to become somebody. And I love Ram Dass, because Ram Dass talks about, in the beginning of our life, we're in somebody training, and towards the end of our life, we're in nobody training. We're training to be nobody after a certain age. And again, I was a bit confused by that, but now that I'm old, I realized, yeah, that's exactly right. The idea of getting old and becoming nobody is so we can rest in peace as they take us to our cemetery plot with a wonderful marker saying, yes, he lived, and yes, he died, and yes, he was somebody, and now he's nobody. And there we are until the end of the world, or the end of the cemetery, or somebody steals our marker, or whatever it is. But up until that point, we might have had 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years of being somebody, of thinking we existed in a certain way. So I think if we look at the teachings of the Buddha, what we start to understand is he only taught two things. And in the hundreds or thousands of talks that he gave, those two things are why we suffer as a human being and how to end that suffering as a human being. And one of the major reasons of our suffering is that we think we exist in a certain identifiable way, that is who we are. And we find ourselves in all of these situations, and we have to be resourceful and flexible in dealing with the circumstances and the people in the circumstances. And that's what self does. Self can be a real good friend, you know, but it can also turn out to be the master, you know, and anybody who's ever had a master or someone who's been in charge of their life for a while, like parents, realize that that good feeling and the bad feeling are always subject to change. That depending on how they're feeling today, and depending on how you're feeling today, that's going to define you for 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, however long, until it changes. And of course, it always does change. So if we get back to the idea of self, we are not the self, but there very well could be a self. Now, I was reading an article on self, and they did a poll. And they said, how many people think they have a soul, and how many people think they have a self? And more people thought they had a soul than the people that thought they had a self. So if you extend the Buddha's idea of not self, we can also include not soul. Now, for me, in the beginning, it was like, I've never felt like I had a soul, though I was baptized as a child. So if I died as a child and never became somebody, I would go to heaven because my soul was baptized and I was blessed. And it made my parents feel really comfortable and good about that. Okay, me being 2, 3, 4 months, I had no idea I was even living, let alone had to die. So as I look back on that, I'm going, yeah, coming from a Christian background and living in a Christian country, so to speak, soul becomes really important. The people of the book, Jews, Christians, Muslims, people of the book, they have souls. And those souls will forever exist in some way, at some level. And for a Buddhist to say, well, there may be a soul there. I don't know, but that's not who I am either. And there may be a self there. I don't really know, but I feel like it. I've been given evidence that a self exists, but I don't really know. And is it okay not to be the self? Is it okay not to be the soul? And actually, I think we don't have much of a choice. Self keeps arising whether we want it to or not. We can modify it, we can train it, we can school it, we can hold back some of the tendencies of the self to get into trouble. If one is prone to gambling, well, we can, join a group and learn why gambling might not be as skillful as it turns out to be, even though it's a whole lot of fun, or drinking or taking drugs, or all the things we do because our self wants to be satisfied in one way or the other. It wants to be happy. It doesn't want to be sad. It wants to venture into altered states of consciousness. There's talking in Los Angeles here about making psychedelics legal so we can all trip out all the time and just have a wonderful life. Or we can do the marijuana thing, and that's going on too. And we can encourage people to get vaccinated as well. That's the self speaking there. So what is this thing? Why does it drive us in a certain way? Well, we always seem to be driven towards happiness and away from sadness, or pleasure and away from pain. And the self is really good at that. The self figures out what the pain is. The self figures out that, if there's enough pain, you will die. So the idea is to avoid the pain or get away from the pain. And then the self comes up with an idea of how to do that. And we go, okay, cool. So if I have an old car with no air conditioning, self says, maybe you could get a new car with air conditioning and you'd be so much happier and so much cooler. And wouldn't life be wonderful then? And we keep listening to these little voices in our head saying, yeah, I bet I could do that. Maybe I could lease for $100 a month and have an air-conditioned car, and life would be so good until the first accident or the first ding, or somebody steals it, or somebody takes your catalytic converter, or on and on and on. Yeah, okay, cool. But that's the self. It's really good at making stuff up, writing the story, and having a good ending. The self always wants to have an ending that's better than suffering. And it goes about doing it. Now, sometimes the self's not very skillful, and sometimes it's really skillful. Sometimes the self is not apparent, and sometimes it's right in our face. When we look at the consequences of what happened, we go, wow, how could I have done that? And the key to that is the I. How could I have done that? How could self had done that? Well, self isn't known as being the wisest phenomena in the world. Self is sometimes pretty stupid because it's dealing with greed, hatred, and delusion. which filters through it all the time. And it's difficult to get beyond that. Okay, so now we got the self. We've been to school. We've got a job. We might be in relationship, and self is really strong and really good. So how could you say that doesn't exist? And the idea, I think, is to say, well, let's see how I feel if I don't have to be the self all the time. And what's a good way to not be self? Well, meditation is one avenue that we can sit down and quietly wait for self to settle, sort of like rocks in water or mud in water. And if we put the muddy water on the table, given enough time, the mud settles to the bottom and the water becomes clear. And given enough time in our meditation practice, as the self starts to settle, a new kind of awareness, a new kind of clarity starts to be available to us that we didn't have before, because it's not being filtered through the self quite as much. Okay, and we can have insights, and we can see things differently, and we can have a different kind of knowing as opposed to understanding. So I like to define relative intellectual understanding as being one way, and ultimate non-dual knowing being another way. That's how I do it in my mind. I'm going, okay, so we have a knowing and we have an understanding, and one is intellectual and one is intuitive. And in meditation practice, it seems to exercise my intuition and allow the intellect to relax for a while and not have to decipher and decode and understand. I can simply feel and have a knowing of the situation that's not necessarily definable or even understandable, but it does allow me to experience my life and the world in a different way. Okay, so did the Buddha ever say we are only one thing? No, the Buddha never went there. He never went to the one. You know, and one is such an important concept. It's such a big number, because if you have one, it generally includes everything. And then we get to two, and now we have dualism. And then we get to three, and now we have a multiplicity that's much more difficult to understand. And so by saying you're one thing, you're really oversimplifying the concept of existence. And I say that because as you venture through Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist wisdom, you come to understand that rather than existing independently and being one thing, we exist in an interconnected and an interdependent way, that everything supports us. We cannot exist by being one. We need to be connected to the many for our existence. So here we are, and now we've settled our mind, and we're starting to feel that interconnection, that interdependence, and there's something else there. Now, in Mahayana Buddhism, they call it Buddha nature. That I define Buddha nature as having the potential to realize enlightenment at any time. That we don't have to necessarily go here and do this and be that. Some have said we're already enlightened. We just need to realize that fact. We need to wake up to that fact. We need to not understand it, but to know it. Okay, cool. So what did the Buddha say we were? Well, number one, he said we are name and form. Okay, we're not only name, we're not only form, we're both. He said we have the five aggregates, the five heaps, as some have called it: form, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. And they're always interacting with each other, and they're always subject to impermanence and change. And that's why they don't exist in an independent, unchanging way. Does anything exist in an independent, unchanging way? The Buddha would say no. The only thing that's beyond all of the change and suffering is nirvana. Okay, so we have that one reference point, nirvana, that allows us to know there's an answer. Remember, the Buddha said, I teach you why you suffer, and I teach you how to end your suffering. And you're not going to find the end of suffering in any of the five aggregates. In name and form, it doesn't exist. That is exactly the reason you are suffering, because you think those things are you. So in our meditation practice, we start to have all that stuff sort of settle. And then the big question comes, well, who am I? What defines me now? What defines me today? What defines me this year? What defines me in my old age, my middle age, my youth or young age? What was defining characteristics? Well, those characteristics are always in play. They're always in flux. We can't ever go back to be who we used to be, though sometimes, you know, there's this sort of romantic idealism of finding the fountain of youth, so you never have to get old. But I tell you, if you think about it in any kind of logical, realistic way, it would be nice to have a younger body, but I wouldn't want to have the young mind trying to deal with the complexity of the world. It's a no-win situation. We gain a little knowledge, we think we got it, and then something else comes up and says, no, that's not it. And then something else comes up and says, no, you missed it, man. You know, go back to the drawing board. You're almost there, but not quite. And so the thing about old age, you know, I'm finding is that there's a certain healthy, I don't know, that happens. And that don't know can also happen in our meditation practice. Sometimes when we think we know, it gives us the wrong information. So can we be in a place that we don't know and still survive and still be clever and still be skillful? And I would say yes, because it doesn't depend on any one thing. It depends on a variety of things to be skillful and wholesome and good and intelligent and intuitive. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So we have the five aggregates, we have name and form. We say to ourselves, I don't know who I am, but I still exist. I still have lunch. I still take a nap. I still feed cats. All those things happen, and I'm not sure why. But it doesn't matter because they're still happening. And that's a good thing. And you can get in your car and turn the key. And do you have to remember how to drive in order to drive? I've come to the conclusion that some people should go over the rules every time they go into their car. But generally speaking, most of us are working at this sort of intuitive level of, I know what I'm doing. I don't have to define it and understand it because I've done it for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or however long you've been driving. And it still works. There's a certain flow. There's a certain intuition in good driving. There's a certain understanding of the rules of the road and realizing not everybody knows those. So there's a defensive attitude as well as you hit the freeways and byways of California, that my job is to get from point A to point B. And along the way, I might have some wonderful experiences and I might have some really negative experiences, but that's just part of the flow and doesn't have to define me and doesn't have to make me one way or the other. So I wish we could share that with all the road rage people out there who just go bananas and ballistic when somebody cuts them off or goes in front of them. My gosh, you know, it's just another way to respond to the world. Okay, let's avoid that. Let's avoid this. And the self still works, even though we don't have to be the self all the time. Now, words of warning. If you're driving and somebody in the highway patrol pulls you over and they're not Broderick Crawford, and they say, I need to see your registration and driver's license, sir. And we show them our registration and driver's license. And then because you've been meditating for 30 or 40 years, you've come to the concept of not self and you've embraced it totally, you could say to the officer, you know, sir, this really isn't who I am. I'm a complex bunch of things that are always changing and in process. Okay, well, the officer needs you to be the guy or gal in the driver's license. The officer needs you to be the owner of the car, or at least registered to you. And he doesn't care. And most of your close friends aren't going to care whether you think you're who you are or not, as long as they know who you are. And you never want to tell your parents that you're not who they think you are, because they brought you into the world and they made you into somebody. And so they want to be comfortable with the idea that you have not gone insane and that you are who they think you are. Okay, cool. So can we do that? Can we do all those things and not be self? Yes, we can. And when you're not self, there's less to defend, there's less to define. There doesn't seem to be less to do. In fact, there seems to be more to do, because now everything becomes available to you. It's an amazing paradox to go and say, I'm not self, and the world opens up, because you're not restricted. You're not confined into being a certain person in a certain way. You are now the universe and interacting with it in a variety of ways. So you have so much more potential when you're not self than when you are self. Self becomes a little prison all its own. And the door, the key is locked until you come into the realm of Buddhism and the practice of meditation. And therefore you will see a key, and your job is to pick up the key, put it in the lock, and open that door. And that door leads you to freedom. And freedom from what? The wise people say, freedom from suffering. When you don't have a self to suffer, your suffering ends. But as soon as you cling to the idea of who you are or what you are, you have the potential to suffer again and again and again. Now, do people with no self feel pain? Absolutely. Pain is not optional. But the thing about the self is the self says, I feel pain, I'll be dead soon, I got to do something about it. Sometimes it's just transitory. It's just a momentary pain and it goes away, like a knee or a shoulder. And so we don't really need to do gymnastics to deal with the pain. We can come to a place of acceptance with it, understanding that we have a mind and a body, and we're subject to pain until that last moment. And then finally, we no longer will feel pain. I remember listening to an interview by William Shatner, Star Trek guy. And when I was in high school, I used to watch it, Star Trek. So I got to see it first run. And William Shatner has tinnitus or tinnitus, however one wants to pronounce it. He's got the ringing in the ear. And sometimes it just drives him crazy. He can't stand it. And so he went to the doctor, and the doctor said to him, well, William, Bill, a few moments before you die, you'll get rid of your tinnitus, your tinnitus, and you'll never have to hear it again. And he says, Doc, I got to wait till I'm almost dead to get rid of it. Something to look forward to, those few moments before you pass into the altered reality of death. So there you go. So we have to come to a place of acceptance. Bill's accepting his tinnitus and working with it. And, you know, a lot of people have it and work with it. And a lot of people have bad knees and bad legs and they work with it. And it's easier to come to a place of acceptance with it rather than saying, it's my bad leg. Why me? Why am I the victim of this bad leg? Why am I the victim of ringing in the ear? Why did it have to happen to me? And we get to that place where there is no I, me, or mine, relatively speaking. And some people have said, but we use those terms all the time, I, me, and mine. So how can you get rid of that? Well, you can't. You can't get rid of those words because that's how we communicate and relate to each other through writing and speaking. And they serve a function, but they don't necessarily identify the truth of who we are. We're simply an I, me, and mine. And that's a relative understanding used in the context of language. And that's fine. All languages have that, as far as I know. And that's how we define self from other. You know, this is mine and that's yours. And no, you can't have mine. That works fine. That's how the words work. So we don't need to get confused by the words. We simply need to understand that the Buddha gave us a real insight. He said, you know what? There may be a self, but that's not who you are. Okay, I see by the clock on the wall, I've spoken already a long time. Hopefully I said something. Does anybody have any comments or questions about what I've said or what they'd like to add? And I see the hands going up and nobody's hand is going up. Okay, so until the hands go up, let me say that I am in charge of the IBMC Facebook page. And for some reason, Facebook locked the page. So if you're going to the IBMC Facebook page, you'll see the same page over and over and over again. All the previous pages are there, but there's no new pages being posted. So I have contacted Facebook twice saying, what the hell? And I'm waiting for their reply. Something to think about as you come up with a question or a comment. Yes. How are you?
Hi, Bhikshu Kusala. From what you were saying, a story came to me. I've heard it a few times recently. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I'm raising the volume. Okay.
One time, from what I've read, I don't remember the exact Pali Sutra, but I heard it quite a few times, the story. The Ananda was the Buddha's second cousin, you know, and they had a very close relationship. And one time the Buddha explained to Ananda that all of the Buddha's teachings were was metta and truth, or friendliness and truthfulness. And so Ananda would tell a few people, and then the word got back to the Buddha that Ananda was saying, oh, the Buddha said his teachings are half friendliness and half truth. So then the Buddha called Ananda and said he wanted to talk to him, and explained to him, I never said they were half. I said they were, my teachings were a combination of friendliness and truthfulness. So I just wanted to share that. And I've been a Buddhist since I met my first Zen teacher when I was 15. The man that wrote A Flower Does Not Speak, Shibayama Roshi. You heard of him?
I have heard of him.
Yeah. So I've been a Buddhist for a long time, and but I've been thinking about these teachings, and I feel that the Heart Sutra for me is probably the safest with these very difficult teachings of not self, no self, and non-self. Now, you know, Ajahn Jeff introduced the idea of non-self now. So that's very interesting.
It is.
And but for me personally, I feel that there's something beyond, there's an awakening beyond my comprehension that the Buddha was talking about when he talked about anicca. And even though some scholars disagree, I personally believe a lot of his teaching of anicca was in response to the Brahmin's idea of Atman.
Yes. No, you're right.
Read could be a hodgepodge of many different things. And from all the times I've read the Buddhist commentary, he didn't agree with that. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. And I think we have to have a sense of humor. So what I wanted to share was, you know, they say laughter is the best medicine sometimes. But what I wanted to share was, I don't think the Buddha is negating any phenomena, any dharma that we experience as a human being, but that we're not understanding it correctly. I think that seems to be the clearest way for me. And I think on a simple level, it's when we're in wisdom, like Prajnaparamita or the Heart Sutra, then we understand the Buddha's teaching. But when we're in ignorance, then we're all bound up and confused. So I just thank you so much for your inspiring talk.
Thank you. Good points. Okay. And yes,
Jenny, you can ask your question.
What I was hearing today was there is a state of knowingness, and we get this through meditation. But yet we want to be in a state of I don't know. So really most of the time I feel like I don't know, and I would like this feeling of knowingness, but yet we're not supposed to know. And
that's your clock, Tina?
yeah,
Okay.
it's really old.
Okay, let me stop you there. And it's not that we don't know. If we know, we don't understand. But when we don't understand, it's a relative intellectual model. And we think we can go and find the answer. Google, encyclopedia, dictionary. So the idea of not knowing is really sort of, well, I know, but I don't understand. And I'm going to stick with that I know, but don't understand. So
Okay.
it's so there is that knowing, but see, the knowing doesn't seem to translate very well. That's why we have poetry and haikus and things of that sort, because the knowing seems to be expressed in those forms in a much more skillful way than simply a sentence or a paragraph.
Mhm.
So when we don't know, I've always felt, well, you know, I don't really understand and probably never will, but I'm comfortable with that. I know enough not to suffer more. I understand that I can reduce my suffering in this way or that way. And that those answers seem to come from knowing, that intuitive sort of, when you know something, you know the whole thing.
Mhm.
When you understand something, you know bits and pieces. You understand bits
Okay,
and
yeah,
pieces.
yes. And then another, I just have one more question.
Yeah,
about
sure.
the
Oh, Jeannie,
the
sure.
meditation, you know, you filter the mud away, it drops. And the meditation brings this. I forgot my question.
Okay.
But it was related to the filtering, the mud coming down, and
Yeah.
that through meditation, the filtering will come down. And that's all we got to do. I mean, because I feel like I've been meditating for a long, long time, and still I still feel very childlike, and I'm, you know, I'm as old as you, Kusala.
Yes, and we're both old, Jeannie. Yes.
So
So-
that's
Well, you brought up some good points. The first point is you've been meditating for a really long time and haven't gotten anywhere, and that's perfect. You have gotten someplace, but what you're doing is you're getting rid of stuff, not accumulating stuff. You know, you can look at it as well. I'm getting rid of a little greed, hatred, and delusion every time I sit down to meditate, but I'm not gaining any more money. You know, I'm not getting a better car. I can't find the right job. Meditation doesn't seem to help me in those respects, but it does allow me to come to a place of acceptance more often than not with the way things are. So meditation works in a completely illogical way as far as the West is concerned. You know, we meditate hoping to get someplace, and yet they tell us we're already there. So how can we get there again? And so meditation is just simply allowing your awareness to shift from relative to ultimate. And that will stimulate the intuition, and it might enhance the intellect as well, because if you want to explain it to someone, you're going to have to get the right vocabulary, have the right language. And when you hear a good Dharma teacher or monk talk, you know, they have their own vocabulary. And so sometimes it requires us to know some of the words to understand what the heck they're saying.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Thanks for the question, Jeannie.
Thank you.
Thanks. Victor, Reverend Shraddha, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for listening.
Well, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Nick, you can ask your question.
Hey, Nick.
Hi, Bhante.
Hi.
Thanks for your great talk, and looks like you're healthy. You look well.
Feel good.
I'm glad about that. Thanks for feeding those kitties. That's good.
You're welcome. The kitties appreciate it too.
I bet they do. I bet they don't struggle with anatta. You know, I bet they don't worry about that too much.
No, not too much. They have a different kind of self. You know, more basic self. Their self determines when they sleep, when they eat, and when they play. And that's pretty much their life.
Sounds wonderful. So my question is about practicing so that I have, I guess, full realization of anatta, right? So like there's meditation, and but I wonder, like throughout the course of the day, is there a formulaic practice of recognizing anatta or experiencing anatta, not understanding it, but like recognizing it? So like as a mood comes up, as a feeling or a perception, as I become aware of it, is the practice of anatta merely becoming mindful and pointing at it and saying, excuse me for pointing at it and saying, not self, this isn't me? Is it, or are those two different things? Is it pointing at an arising mood and saying, not self, not self? Oh, something calamitous has happened, something wonderful has happened, not self, not self. Or am I, if I say not self, am I identifying this is not me, and therefore cultivating more Nick, which is, you know, not what I'm trying to do? What do I do?
No, I got you. I got it. And so number one, a real good way for self to arise is to be in line, become impatient, to wonder why the line is moving so slowly, why people can't count their money, or have to recheck the receipt to make sure they won't overcharged. And so self just keeps arising and arising and wants to fix the situation. Okay, cool. Now, when you say, okay, that's myself, what you're really doing is yourself is saying that's me. It's not about no self at all. It's about self-recognizing self, and both of them are the same thing. It's like trying to hear itself, the eye to see itself, the nose to smell itself, the tongue to taste itself. you know, it's maybe a mindful practice, but it doesn't get to the heart of the matter. So what I would suggest when this stuff comes up is not to identify it, name it, or label it, but simply be aware of it. Let the intuition in on the self arising. Let that intuitive part of your mind that's silent and has no vocabulary come into the presence of self, which has a vast vocabulary and knows exactly how things are supposed to be. And when they're not, the self arises to fix them and oftentimes becomes frustrated and impatient because whatever we do to fix the line, it's not going to work. It's only going to make it worse. So self comes up, somebody cuts you off in the freeway. If you curse that person, don't say, oh, that's my self cursing. Just be aware of cursing happening. Just be aware of tension happening, of anger happening. And that awareness deflates or diffuses the self. It's as long as we're not aware of it, as long as we relate to it as being who we are, it's going to grow and grow and grow. But as soon as we simply become aware of it, the tendency is for it to fall away. And so when we're sitting in meditation, it's really easy to not engage. Well, I shouldn't say easy, but with practice, it becomes easier not to engage and let those things fall away. Impermanence, anicca, is our friend in all these circumstances because it's only a matter of time until something else catches the attention of the self and forces it into action. And it happens 1,000 times every day. And of course they have the concept of monkey mind. We're running from branch to branch, problem to problem, pleasure to pleasure, happiness to happiness. We just keep running around. And if we really want to see how self works, we just need to put the focus of awareness on how it does its magic, on how it arises, how it exists, and how it falls away. And when you can see those three things, then what you get to see, as my first teacher Shinzen used to say, he says, between everything, there is a space. And what you start to see when you have thoughts arise, exist, and pass away, is you start to see the space in between the thoughts. So there's a momentary emptiness in between the thoughts, and then the next thought takes root and arises, exists, and passes away. And when you can start to see that on a regular basis, there's a certain freedom that you don't ever have to be the thought that arises, that now you have a choice. And if the thought that arises is generosity, compassion, and wisdom, definitely want to encourage that, be part of that. If the thought arises greed, hatred, and delusion, we need to sit it out. We need to wait for it to go away. And in between, what we're doing is we're exercising control over the self. The self no longer becomes our master. The self now becomes a tool that we can skillfully use to make our life and the lives of others better. That make sense, Nick?
It really does. It's very helpful. Thank you. So it sounds like instead of labeling as a mood or a perception arises, not labeling, but being with it, observing it.
Observing it. Without critiquing it, without criticizing it, without saying what a good deal that was, or look at me now, look how great I am. All those things. It's just simply that raw awareness before the conceptualization of what's happening and who we are happens.
I really like, there's a practice there with the gap.
Yes.
The pause. I think that's a good place for me to maybe start. So thank you.
Thank you. Selvin, how are you today? You doing okay?
Yes, Reverend Kusala, I'm doing great.
Good.
We're at the top of the hour. I just wanted to quickly comment the how I realized the no self or not self or non-self is in aging. Because a lot of us, well, it is true, at least for me, that we want to hold on to what we were as opposed to what we actually are at this moment.
Yes.
And
what we're going to be.
Well, I want to be tomorrow what I was 20 years ago. So
Yes.
Thank you again. Great talk.
Thank you. And I see by the clock on the wall, my time is up. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, listening to what I had to say. Hopefully it was, it meant something. If it didn't mean anything, that from the Zen perspective is okay as well.
All right. Thank you for everybody. Thank you, Kusala. Again, I want to mention the next Sunday, I believe 8th of the August, Silas Maharjan is going to give a Dhamma talk, Nepalese Dhamma teacher. And the 29th of the August, Ulamani service, I hope Sraddha and the Kashanti will be here. You hear me, Kashanti?
Yes, we'll be here. We'll be
All
here.
right. All right. Thank you again. We're going to chant page 4 and page 10. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami, dhammam saranam gacchami, sangham saranam gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. The Lord passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving share all grief, and the sick find hell relief. May all merit be extended to everyone, that we together with all beings may gain Buddha's way. Om Mani Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. By the power of Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, you all be well and happy. Thank you.